Week we'll be discussing phonetics and phonology, and I might try to keep this brief because I'm extremely congested tonight, and I have been for the last few days. So I'm not sure how it's going to sound on video quality, but I will do my best to lecture through this with the congestion. So please forgive me. Okay, so phonetics. So the difference between phonetics and phonology. We like to call these the PH words. Phonetics is the study of the production or perception of speech sounds that occur in each language and in all languages versus phonology, which is the next chapter's discussion, is the study of the rules that govern the speech sound system. Now, in phonetics, phonemes are the smallest units that make one word different from another. The perception of, memory for, and ability to think about phonemes play a central role in learning to speak, read, and spell. So why focus on phonemes? Why is the study of phonemes important for us in language and subsequently in literacy as the children move into the literacy stage? So phonemes determine the identity of words. In alphabetic writing systems such as English, we are driven by the phonemes. The letters represent the language at the phoneme level, whereas other languages are represented at the syllable level or even at the word level by their symbols. And then proficient reading is strongly associated with the ability to identify, remember, and sequence phonemes. So we know that children with stronger phoneme awareness are better readers than children with weak phoneme awareness. Now, when you're thinking about phonetics and phonology and phonemes, it's important to remember this is all very meta-linguistic. Meta is a root word, meaning beyond or higher. I think of higher language skills, higher thinking skills. Meta, you're thinking about it. So meta-linguistic, you're thinking about the linguistic components, or you're thinking about language. Thinking that involves thinking about and reflecting on the structure, form, and use of language. That is what meta-linguistic means. This can be developed through formal study or reflection. Sometimes children just naturally get phonology and phonetics and phonemic awareness, but oftentimes it needs to be explicitly taught. Phoneme awareness is a kind of meta-linguistic skill of recognizing the separate sounds or phonemes within whole words. So when we hear a whole word unit, we process it as a unit. We don't break it down into the individual sounds, but to recognize phonemes, we have to break apart what we're acoustically processing. So being literate is an obstacle to thinking about the speech sounds and spoken words, because when we see words written, we're thinking about it in terms of the letters and the graphemes rather than the phonemes, the graphemes being the letters. Many speakers of English have trouble identifying the discrete segments in words, so even though we are fluent readers, we can't necessarily take box and break it down into b, a, k, s. We assume that X being one letter is one sound when it's actually two. Why are phonemes elusive? We're not taught the speech sound inventory. We're never taught all the speech sounds in the English language, unless, of course, you go through a course in phonetics to be a speech-language pathologist. This is something we just naturally know. So it's tacit or implicit. Speakers of English recognize when words do and do not conform, though, to English phonology, so we can recognize that certain combinations can be made and not made. We can recognize that BL is an acceptable blend, but ZL is not acceptable blend. Now, even within the study of phonetics and linguistics, linguists don't agree on the number of English phonemes, they ranges from 40 to 52 phonemes or sounds, and a lot that comes into with the glides and the liquids and the R's and the L's and the distinction between those. But we're not here to debate about how many English phonemes there are. We're just here to talk about the level of awareness we need to have in phoneme awareness. So to become aware of speech sounds, we must become conscious of what is unconscious and divide into parts what exists as wholes. Again, we process it as a whole, and to think about it and break it down into the parts, we must have that meta-linguistic awareness. Sounds are co-articulated in conversational speech as well. So things blend together even more when we're speaking in sentences and conversation than just sounding it out piece by piece, word by word. Phonemes sound different in isolation than in words. And take the word can and try to break it down sound by sound, and you go k, and, can. No one says can, we say can. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in phonology about the allophones and picking up the characteristics of neighboring phonemes. So our brains perceive a category of sound that we recognize as a phoneme, but even though there's a lot of individual differences amongst how those phonemes are produced. Sounds in isolation are abstract phonemes that exist in our minds, but do not exist in exactly the same form when combined in spoken words. So speech sound identification, how do we proceed through this phoneme awareness. We need awareness of sound segments, but it's not necessary for verbal communication. We can speak without being aware of the individual phonemes or sound segments. And so oftentimes kindergartners know letter names, but not the sounds or the segments of speech. So they need to be explicitly taught this. And we've seen this problem arise more and more as the millennial generation has come of age, and you've seen the change in focus in preschool from just traditional nursery rhymes and developmentally appropriate instruction to more academic instruction in preschool. But the academic instruction is not raising their phoneme awareness because they're not being exposed to rhymes and those traditional tales that we got when we were in preschool. Or I should say that I got, because y'all are probably not the same age as me about when it comes to your preschool experiences. So teachers need to provide explicit phoneme awareness instruction for children before instruction in letter sound association for reading and spelling can be effective. But phoneme awareness is crucial for reading success. That's very important to remember. Throughout the course of your studies, children must have phoneme awareness. And you can tell when a child doesn't have phoneme awareness, for instance, when we're working with our children with speech and articulation deficits. They're lacking an awareness of a particular sound phoneme, or lacking the production of that phoneme or the ability to produce that phoneme because it doesn't exist in their repertoire. So imagine them coming into the reading aspect and how much more difficulty they're going to have because they don't have all the sounds that are age appropriate in their repertoire when they enter kindergarten. Now, stacking on top of that, we have to add a letter to it that you need to recognize the phoneme for which you do not have in your oral language. So the building blocks of language are consonants and vowels that make up the speech sound inventory. And these are referred to as segments of speech, not the letters we represent. So this is not talking about letters, it's talking about the individual speech sounds, phonemes, like k, s, l, r. Now, dialects cause audible differences in sound production, but speakers understand each other despite of dialect. So, you can still understand someone from New York or the Bronx as well as you can somebody from the South. Sometimes there might be a little variation in what you can understand, but in general, we understand other English speakers. So I wanted to point out in the book the third phoneme exercise, and this is a good conversation about dialect. If you're looking at, let me find it. Again, my apologies for my congestion. All right, so if you look at the counting phonemes exercise, and no, sorry, that's the wrong one. Exercise 2.2, identify the third phoneme in the following words. Did you have any disagreements from her answers? I mean, choose. I said the third phoneme was writhe and sink, but then when I got to pneumonia, and there was a disagreement to me at least, because I pronounce it new, you, so being the third phoneme being you, versus some people pronounce it pneumonia, pneumonia, and the third phoneme being which is what she identified in the book. So that's a dialectical difference possibly, or just an individual difference in the enunciation of that word. Vision, I agreed on, but then you got to folk. And it might just be my southern dialect, but I say folk with the O. It's kind of glided, though. It kind of blends in with the O, but it is still just, it's not folk as it was distinguished in the book or even at dictionary.com when I was going to it and making them pronounce it for me so I could hear how they were saying it. So, yes, if you say folk dancing, you have oak is the third sound, but I say folk dancing or folk music. So I believe that "ul" is the third sound, but that's the way I pronounce it. So I'd like to know if anybody else had any discussion of that. Kitchen, I agree, and then square, ooh, that Q always throws everybody off. So when we learn a phonetic system for transcribing and describing sounds, we help to clarify the difference between phonemes and symbols used for writing. The phonetic alphabet represents each individual phoneme within that language. So nothing can exist that's a combination, essentially. There's always one symbol for one sound. So phonetic transcription. Phonetic systems are when one sound corresponds to one letter. And like I just said, the phonetic alphabet represents all the sounds of the world's language that speech can be described with a common symbol system, or the International Phonetic Alphabet. When speech sounds are produced with the movement of the tongue, lips, and throat. All right. We push air up from the lungs through the glottis. The air is more obstruction in consonant production than in vowel production. So therefore, we refer to consonants as being closed and vowels being open, because the vowels can remain consonant and you can continue to phonate as long as you have the airflow and the air breath support. And this is, of course, all reviewed from your speech science classes. There's a nice diagram on page 31 of the speech sound mechanism, the vocal tract, the nasal cavity, tongue, and pharynx. All right, so consonants and distinguishing features. So we distinguish the phonemes differently between consonants and vowels. Consonants are formed when the mouth partially closes and airflow obstructed by the lips, teeth, and tongue, though some have vowel-like qualities, such as those R's and L's, or R and L, since we're talking about phonemes. So consonants are distinguished by the place of articulation, or where the sound is made, or position of the lips, teeth, and tongue in the front, middle, or back of the mouth. We have the bilabials, which are made with the lips together, the labiodentals, which are made with the teeth and the lips, the interdentals, which is where our tongue is between our teeth, of course, and there's a lot of linguistic cues in these words to tell us where that placement is. Labio being lip, and dental being teeth, inter being between, dental being teeth. The alveolar sounds are where the tongue is placed behind the alveolar ridge, just above the back side of the teeth. The velars, the tongue is raised against the soft palate. The palatals, the front part of the tongue, is on the hard palate behind the alveolar ridge. And the glides are two permissible phonetic symbols for the same sound. And the glides are kind of open in the mouth. Then we have the manner of articulation, how the sound is made with production of airflow through the mouth. Back to the glides. You have two productions of the r sound, r versus and so it glides, and where the distinction becomes of that r versus being a vowel, r being a consonant, but we can produce r in the front of the mouth or high and tight in the back, r, and that all varies from individual to individual. So that's regarding place of articulation. And manner of articulation is how the sound is made with production of airflow through the mouth. So we have the stops, where the airflow is completely stopped, and then there's a puff of air, also known as the plosives. You have the continuous, which have continuous airflow, and all fricatives are continuous. So s and z and f and v. The affricates are produced with the stop closure and then immediate release of the air. The liquids float in the mouth. They're very difficult. They're the last to be learned in speech, oral speech production, and in reading and writing. The glides have vowel-like qualities, and then the glottal stops are allophonic variations in English, like that tongue tap, T and D. The sonorants are liquids, glides, nasals, and vowels, and obstruents are non-nasal stops, fricatives, and affricates. And obviously, I would have a lot of difficulty with producing nasal sounds tonight with the amount of congestion I'm having. So I'm having a little hyponasality. And then finally, say place, manner, and voicing. Vocal cords vibrate or they don't vibrate. It can't get any more any simpler than voicing. Okay, so the vowels. In English, we have and let me quickly say the phonic symbols and the phonetic symbols on page 34 and 35 are just a review of where those all of those consonants are placed in this chart based on place, manner, and voicing. So that's good to review to know where all of those are occurring, and those are all the consonants in the English language. Now, regarding the vowels, English has 15 vowels. The vowels are open, unobstructed speech sounds that are not consonants. No syllables can be without a vowel, so a vowel is the foundation of a word, or it's the nucleus of the syllable. Then you have the vowel chart, where vowels are charted based on their placement in the mouth, high, mid, low, and then front and back. High to low, front to back. All right, so no syllables, vowel chart. All right, we have stressed and unstressed vowels. We have tense and lax vowels. Vowels are distinguished by the tongue position, front, mid, back, and tongue height, high and low. All front vowels are unrounded, meaning the lips are apart, and all back vowels are rounded. The diphthongs, they don't fit into the vowel chart dimensions, and they glide in the middle. It's considered a neutralized vowel. So because you have two positions for the diphthongs, I, your mouth opens and then closes. O, you open and then you round. E, well, E's not really, I'm sorry, but A, oi, oi, round and then lips apart. Then you have the long vowels, which are tense vowels spoken with more tension in the tongue muscles, and short vowels, which are lax vowels. And not to be confused with long vowels and short vowels in reference to reading and writing. As the book points out, that used to be a distinction. We used to hold certain vowels longer that are considered the long vowels, but we no longer use that in English today. So it's really an arbitrary term when it comes to reading and writing. So that is phonetics. So moving on to phonology. What is phonology? That's the study of speech sound system of any language, including the rules and patterns by which phonemes are combined into words and phrases. It refers both the sound patterns, the sound themselves, and to the discipline of studying those sound patterns and their mental representations. Speech sounds are only combined in certain sequences, and they vary from speaker to speaker. So, as I mentioned earlier, we know there are only certain cluster combinations that can be made, or vowel and consonant combinations, even to a certain extent. Individuals with problems in reading, writing, and language reading, writing, and language processing have weaknesses in the domain of phonology. That's very well established in research. And then if we teach them, though, the sound symbol correspondence, so teaching them what letters represent what sounds, and those double letters that represent one sound, then it's more effective when it includes explicit, accurate information about the units of speech and print. So how do we do that? And you'll get more into this later on in your studies, but in general, this is a general overview about how do we effectively teach these components of phonology, particularly to children, when you're talking about such an abstract metalinguistic skill. So we have sequences, syllables, and stretches. Sequences, or words in English language, are formed from certain permissible sequences of phonemes influenced by ease of pronunciation and the grammar of their language. So the book gives several examples of what combinations can and cannot be made. We cannot start a word with the sound, the back ng. Don't know if you can really distinguish that with my hyponasality tonight. So when words begin with an affricate, a liquid, a glide, or a nasal, the next sound must be a vowel. There can be no more than 3 consonant sounds at the beginning of a word, and some sound sequences in spoken words are arranged that sounds are articulated in the same place of the mouth, like jump and jumble, the M and P and M and B combination, both being bilabials. Your tongue is moving. You have some back vowels with back consonants, and vice versa. And this is just how the speech has naturally developed. It's biological programming, essentially. We're going to naturally say what comes easiest to us. And when it comes to syllables are the units of speech organized around a vowel. You have a simple syllable, which the vowels preceded and are followed by a single consonant. And then you have complex syllables where 2 or more consonants in a cluster before or after a vowel. And these are more difficult for children to learn to read and spell, particularly when you get into some of those rules with the LEs and R consonant patterns. You have syllable, so regarding that, syllable complexity is important to consider in choosing words for phoneme awareness, decoding, and spelling instruction, because this is something that develops over time. It's not going to be just naturally there when children begin kindergarten. The children's ability to identify all the sounds in consonant clusters tends to develop after reading instruction is started, after kindergarten for many typical 5- and 6-year-olds. So being able to break those consonant clusters down into individual sounds and phonemes is a later occurring skill. Then regarding syllable boundaries are hard to distinguish because they vary from speaker to speaker. So it all depends on how you're saying it, and even linguists can't agree on where the boundaries of syllables occur. But we can agree on onsets and rhymes and other patterns of syllables and how they can occur together. So at onset and rhymes, every syllable must have a peak, which is the vowel, the part with the most sonority or resonance. Consonants tend to cluster at the beginning of a stressed syllable. So stringent is the one they use, astringent. is an example they use in the textbook. So it's going to cluster at near the stressed syllable and not at the end of the unstressed syllable. So sequential order rules for allowable consonant sequences govern our perceptions of syllable boundaries, how the sequencing goes together. We're not going to break up STR usually because we know that's a consonant cluster combination. For onset, what comes before the vowel? That's the vowel. That's everything and the vowel. That's the onset. So everything. Sorry, onset is everything that comes before the vowel. Not every word is going to have an onset. If it begins with, if it's just a vowel alone or begins with the vowel, there is no onset. There's just the rhyme. The rhyme is the vowel and what comes after it. And I can remember having that aha moment sometime in grad school when I realized that rhyme, R-I-M-E, and rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E, when you're talking about rhyming skills, you're matching them based on the rhyme because it's a vowel and then everything following the vowel. So at and in and est. That's always the rhyme. And so cat, mat, bat is onset rhyme is k, at, b, at, m, at. So that's how you can establish that rhyming sequence and pattern. So that's one aha moment that I had, and I share it with you about rhyming skills and how to remember onset rhyme. Then how to teach syllable awareness. You can there are some tried and true methods the book talks about. One is to hold the lips together while saying a multisyllable word. So watermelon. And you'll know when the lips part, that's a new vowel because the vowels can't be said with the lips closed. The jaw drop activity is another one. And you just simply put your chin just below your jaw and you say it exaggeratedly, watermelon. How many times did your chin hit your hand under your jaw? And that's how you can help teach children some syllable awareness in a multisensory way. So now moving on to prosodic features, stress and intonation patterns. This encompasses intonation, phrasing, and stress patterns on words, phrases, and sentences. So I expect her to show up late. I expect her to show up later. I expect her to show up later. We're changing our stress and our tone will change the meaning of a word. And how do we distinguish between read and read in a sentence when they're both spelled R-E-A-D? It's all about the context of the sentence and what's surrounding it to know whether it's present tense or future tense or past tense. So the phrase stress of a sentence will determine which meaning is intended by a single word string. Any multisyllable word will have a primary stress and sometimes a secondary stress applies as part of the word's form. And sometimes it varies as how people say particular words, Caribbean versus Caribbean, in the stress pattern. So they're not always consistent, but for the most part, we know that that we're using those patterns based on the context of the sentence. But it does have that individual variation based on dialect and individual enunciations of words. Now, this really causes difficulty for those individuals with phonological processing weaknesses because they have trouble achieving awareness of stress in a word, phrase, or sentence. Before you go self-diagnosing and say, oh my gosh, I had so much trouble with syllabication and trying to identify the stressed syllable versus the unstressed syllable when I did phonetics. Not to worry, this is probably not applicable to you. You're not a person with phonological processing difficulties, but we do see it in children and individuals who struggle with those skills and have reading difficulties. So what are some aspects of phonological processing? We're talking about phonology being the rule system. So what is phonological processing? Phonological processes are phonological memory, phonological retrieval, and naming. Phonological memory is the working memory, temporary mental storage of speech stimuli, the same working memory that we're using to remember a phone number or a sequence of numbers or a sequence of letters. That's our phonological working memory. We're not sending it to the long-term memory for storage just to quickly retrieve it. So when speech is translated into mental representations, it is said to be encoded into memory. And that's the next step when it transitions into that long-term memory. Most of the time when we're asking children, tell me all the sounds like cat, they're just going to their short term cat, k, at, cat. Where you'll see this problem with your children with severe learning disabilities or language problems or phonological processing issues is that they don't have the short-term working memory to retain the sounds as they're sounding them out and blending. So they come to the word such as cat and they go k, at, and then they can't blend it into cat. They'll go k, at, because they've already forgotten that first sound of the word. So that's where you can see that impacting them and their language and literacy skills. Phonological retrieval is the retrieval of the phonological form of a word from long-term memory. So this is a separate task. It's the mental act of formulating and pronouncing the word. And then naming is a verbal retrieval that involves extracting a word from the mental dictionary or lexicon where words are filed in memory. Now, why naming is significant and important, we know rapid automatic naming is used in assessing literacy-related skills, but it's very controversial because people argue about what type of a skill it's measuring. But there seems to be a correlation that children or individuals who have trouble with rapid automatic naming are going to have trouble with reading. And this is whenever you use measures like letter naming skills or naming numbers or naming colors even. Anything that requires them to do a task rapidly. And I've been coordinating the DIMLS assessment in our school, which is our universal screener, and they have to name letters and they have to name numbers. And I was working with this particular child today who's developmentally delayed, who's performing very well academically. But you can see her rapid automatic naming skills break down the further along she got in the test, or screener rather, because it was only for 1 minute. And then initially she starts out strong and she's going at a good rate, but she putters out and she begins to have more and more difficulty retrieving the names of those letters or the names of those numbers, because that's an area of weakness for her in the phonological processing. And she's probably always going to have that deficit. We just have to give her the compensatory skills to make up for that in the areas and teach her to be a good reader. So that's what we're trying to do. But you can see this in students when you begin to work with them, how that deficit impacts them in their language and literacy skills. Then there's also confrontation naming, which is just time tests for labeling a series of pictures of objects. But this helps indicate how well they can retrieve words from their lexicon. And we know that children who have word retrieval problems, just like adults with word retrieval problems from, a stroke or a CVA, might have, because that area of the brain isn't working as appropriately and as effectively as it should. I just had my own word retrieval problem there. So phonological processing leads into phonological awareness. What is this? This is something you need to know in schools too, and this is very important. And in any conversation about literacy, this needs to be the primary component. And if someone's talking to you about why literacy matters and how do we become good, effective teachers of literacy, if they're not talking about phonological awareness, in my opinion, they do not know what they're talking about, because this is the foundation of everything, and we have to lay the foundation to make them good readers. It's a metalinguistic facility with spoken word analysis. It's the ability to identify, think about, and mentally manipulate the parts of words. So all this stuff we're talking about, the phonemes and being able to break the words down into the sounds, that's phonological awareness. It includes spoken syllables, onsets and rhymes, and phonemes, as well as rhyming skills. Words can be analyzed at 3 levels: the syllable level, the onset rhyme level, and the phoneme level. And I would actually add one more level to this. She's probably clumping it into syllable, but I would add the sentence level, because you can break words down into sentences before you get to the syllable level. Now, phoneme or phonemic awareness is any oral language task that requires attending to, thinking about, or intentionally manipulating the individual phonemes in spoken words and syllables. It does not involve print. It can, but it doesn't have to. It's an oral skill. You can do it with the lights off. It does develop gradually and hierarchically, so there are skills that they can do early on, and there are skills that early on are too difficult for them and too high level. And a problem I've seen with the dyslexia screener that schools are requiring children to do in first grade and kindergarten with some of the components of the screener that people are using is that it has a high level skill of phoneme manipulation. Take bat and change the b to and what's the new word. And that's a high level skill that, as you can see on the chart in table 3.2, that even just to segment the phonemes was only 7% of 5-year-olds could do that. And they don't even have phoneme manipulation on here. So if only 7% of 5-years could tell you all the sounds in the word, why are we given that as a measure to screen dyslexia, but that's a whole other issue we can talk about later. But phoneme, excuse me, phoneme or phonemic awareness is a component of phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the broad term that refers to the sentence and syllable and rhyming level, and what's that rhyme? And phoneme awareness refers specifically to phonemes. So first of all, you have to do the phonological level of being able to break sentences into words, words into syllables, words into odds, rhymes before you can reach the phonemic level of words into phonemes. So what's a development of phonological awareness? First, it's rhyming, then it's alliteration. Sweet Sally saw 6 seals sitting by the shore. You know, like those types of tongue twisters where you have the same initial phoneme. Then there's blending. So take at, what's the word? Cat. And you have to be able to blend before you can break cat apart into k at. To perceive phonemes, our brain must translate an unsegmented acoustic signal into segments that are perceived categorically, which is a consequence of central linguistic processing. And the spectrogram on page 59 has a good illustration about the minimal differences between he'd, had, and who'd. They all have one phoneme difference, but we must be able to perceive that. So phonemes, again, smallest segment that's used to create a new word, and it's described by distinctive features, which we talked about in the phonetics chapter. A minimal pair of words that differ only in one speech sound, and all of the other sounds are identical. And again, it's referring to sounds, not spellings. It represents the level of precision in word analysis that a person with fully developed phonological awareness has achieved. This is the highest level of phonological awareness, to distinguish between two words with only one distinct phoneme difference. Now, regarding phoneme variation and allophones. Allophones are phonetic variations that are still perceived as part of the same category of sounds. That's that tongue flap, T and D, like table, swept, bitter, tray. All those T's or T sounds are produced in different ways based on the proximity to the vowel or surrounding consonants. Not all speakers of a language change the phones in the same way either. So we say LSU instead of LSU, as some from not the South or not from Louisiana might pronounce it. Systematic allophonic variation is driven by a set of unconscious phonological rules for the production of sounds and words. So essentially the surrounding vowels, the surrounding concepts are influencing the allophonic variations that we're perceiving. Speech sounds are abstract and concrete. Abstractly, they are determined by a set of distinctive features. We know which phoneme to use unconsciously based on the grammatical and phonological rules, which are important when teaching language. So even though we know this on the unconscious level, and as SLPs, it's our job to raise our metalinguistic awareness and become aware of everything that this means. It's also the job of us to communicate that to the teachers, and teachers to communicate that to the children of why words are spelled this way and pronounced this way and act this way, because there are rules governing that. So, for instance, the reduction of vowels to schwa. In multisyllabic words, we're always going to have something that has the primary stress, and then sometimes you have the secondary stress. Therefore, vowels are pronounced as a neutral schwa if the primary stress is not on that schwa vowel. Schwa accounts for 20% of all vowels uttered, and is usually spelled with A, I, and U. O. Not U, sorry, A, I, and O. But oftentimes, I know I initially thought that schwas were going to be spelled with U because it's but that's not actually how it's spelled or pronounced. Now we have vowel nasalization. Vowels spoken before nasal consonants are nasalized, and so I again use that can example. Can, we're with the because nasalized into an. We're already nasalizing, moving into it, and predicting and perceiving the placement before we get there. For consonant aspiration, we have characteristics of voiceless stop consonants in certain positions. Only K, T, and P, or K and T. Sorry, it's hard to do that when I'm recording. When a voiceless stop consonant occurs at the beginning of a stressed syllable, it will be aspirated. In vowel lengthening, the voicing of the consonant after the vowel determines its length. Therefore, the terms long and short vowels are arbitrary. I already mentioned that. I've used the example several times of flapping of medial t and d. They're pronounced as tongue flaps, and they occur between two vowels, and the second vowel is not stressed. So, little and liddy, ladder and ladder, tally and dally. So it's hard to distinguish between those sometimes, and we need to know more about the roots of the words to know how to spell them when we're teaching this to children. Affrication, the affricates are a stop of breath followed by a fricative, and sometimes or affricated because of their placement. And then we have the vowels that are raising before a velar or back consonant. The tongue raises to anticipate the velar consonant, such as lag, leg. Whenever you see these misspellings, you know it's because children are perceiving those vowels as being higher than what they are, because we don't pronounce get, we pronounce it get. And a lot of that has to do with our southern dialect and the way where the vowels are placed in the mouth. So phonology and spelling. Errors consistent with good phoneme awareness but underdeveloped knowledge of conventional spelling are good signs. We want them to follow a good phoneme awareness pattern and just need that conventional spelling instruction. Common spelling errors indicate underdeveloped awareness of phoneme sequence or identity, and that's what you commonly see in children who are developing reading skills. But we see inconsistent errors that don't follow phoneme patterns or phoneme awareness. That's when we should be concerned. Children's spelling attempts are good diagnostic indicators of phoneme awareness, are sensitive indicators to response to intervention or RTI, which we'll also discuss either in this course or throughout more of the coursework. But essentially that's that children need to receive intervention before we can label them reading disabled to make sure they've received adequate, appropriate instruction at their level. So how do we teach phonological awareness principles? We need to follow the progress of phonological development, such as Table 3.2. It's a stair step. It's a hierarchy. You start with rhyming, then you go to sentence segmentation, and then you can go to sentence blending. Even you can do sentence blending first. Sentence segmentation. Then you can do syllable blending. Say these water. Say it fast. Water. Then you can do a syllable segmentation. And you go through, once that rhyme, you go through all those processes before you reach the phoneme level. You want to focus students' attention on speech sounds before letters. So raise this phonological awareness before you introduce the letters. And but as number 9 says, use letters as soon as the children are ready. So you don't want to hold off on the letter exposure too long either. And everything should be integrated and context-based and appropriate and engaging for them. I know. Lots of challenges in that, but we can do it. We want to encourage mouth awareness and placement and what your mouth is doing. Jan Norris from LSU has phonic faces that combines the letters with the awareness of the mouth's placement, which is a good research-based strategy. We want to include all English phonemes in instruction. It needs to be multisensory, especially when working our children. It can't be just oral. You want brief activities. You want to model it, I do it, and then you want to do it together, practice it, we do it, and then give the independence while you supervise, you do it. You want to give corrective feedback when they do something wrong. You do it in a positive way, but correct them. And again, you want to use letters as soon as children are ready. And then finally, phonological awareness activities. So rhyme, judgment, and pre-K and kindergarten. Do these words rhyme? Yes or no? Rhyme matching, find the matching word that rhymes. Alliteration, again, those all the consonants, so the initial consonants match. Syllable blending, blending the syllables together. Water, say it fast, water. Syllable deletion, say baseball without ball. What word do you get base? Syllable counting, count the words. Let's count the syllables in computer. And you clap it out, tap it out, stomp it out. Initial sound matching, what begins with the same sound as dog, deer, or bug. Onset rhyme division, I'm going to say k, at, say it fast, cat. Then rhyme production, tell me a word that rhymes with cat, mat. So you can see rhyme production is one of the last developing skills. And really in first grade is whenever you expect them to master the phoneme level. So final sound matching, and that's very difficult for kids, which has the same ending sound, a back, tick, or mit. Blending the phonemes, I'm going to say k, at, what's the word, cat. Teaching sound blending. Then phoneme segmentation, tell me all the sounds in cat, k, at. And this is a skill we begin measuring at the middle of kindergarten. with the Dibbles assessment, universal screener, but really they aren't expected to master it until the end of first grade. Initial and final sound substitution. So take bat, change the b to k. What word do you get? That's cat. Middle vowel substitution, very difficult for children. Cat, change the ah to ah. What do you get? Caught. Sound chaining. So that was a multisensory sound chain. You put these together to blend. And then you transition to the letter sound correspondence. And then finally Pig Latin. I haven't even mastered Pig Latin, but it is a good phoneme awareness skill to be taught, especially if you have older students, because they enjoy saying, manipulating the words like that. So that is all for this week. Thank you for your patience with my congestion.